Afternoon all, let's have a look today, continuing our Evolution of Style series. Let's have a look at Alexander Alekhine's only win against Emanuel Lasker, which occurred in Zurich 1934. Now some people would argue that Alexander Alekhine, he didn't really want to lose his title, and he picked his challenges quite carefully with the London sort of conditions of having to raise quite a lot of money, which made it difficult for Kappa actually to get a rematch. And it ended up being Berlimu and Juve, and Juve unexpectedly toppled won against Alekhine, despite the press severely I think favouring Alekhine. Everyone didn't expect Alekhine to lose, but he became the first champion to regain his world title against Juve when he stayed off the alcohol and drank milk instead, apparently, as the stories go. But Juve was a great champion as well, and he did much to popularise chess, especially in the Netherlands. But Lasker, was lurking around the scenes, was the longest world champion, and the margins which he lost, say to Capablanca, was actually 6-2, but Lasker's record against Alekhine was actually favourable. And I'm just going to pause the video to check, or I could take you to ChessGames.com right now. In fact, I'll take you to ChessGames.com, and if we look at ChessGames.com and put Alekhine versus Lasker, this is a way of getting the match record, and you'll see here, it says here, Lasker actually beats Alexander Alekhine 3-1 with 4 draws. Which is quite impressive, and even more impressive actually, and this is actually quite frightening. If you look, for example, at the 1924 victory where Lasker really thumped Alekhine in New York, I checked actually on an accuracy check on chesspo.st, and the accuracy of Emanuel Lasker is often approaching Houdini strength, like 60% plus. Very, very high accuracy, and it's almost as if Lasker's, it's like playing against Houdini. I think his middle game, Lasker's middle game, seems to be highly powerful. And to say that other world champions were definite, evolutions over Lasker is a bit much. Up until 1925, it seemed Lasker was still a huge giant in the game. This is Lasker's only defeat at the hands of Alexander Alekhine. It's an interesting defeat. Well, it definitely had the positional pressure going. So from a stylistic point of view, there was the basis of the attack from the very strong position and the neat tactic which blew black away, which I'll let you guess when we get there. Okay, so let's have a look. So Alexander kicked off with d4, and then we have something very, very popular in those times, despite the hypermoderns. The Queen's Gambit was on the rage. Queen's Gambit declined. None of this more modern Slav stuff. They didn't mind blocking in their bishop on c8. They played e6. It was seen as okay. Later you could get the bishop out. As a challenge to get the bishop out with some sort of advantages. So knight c3, knight f6. Now knight f3 from Alexander, not minding losing the c-pawn. Maybe he's got e4 with a bit of compensation. So bishop e7, or more than enough compensation. Bishop g5. Okay, Black's game's a little bit cramped. Knight bd7. But it's classic. It's absolutely classic stuff. e3 after castles. Now delaying the bishop on f1. Delaying because Black might play d takes c4 with bishop d3. So why not wait a little bit longer with a useful waiting move? Rook c1. So rook c1 is going to put pressure on the c-file, usually in a classic minority attack. If Black plays c6, the c6 is going to be vulnerable on the c-file later anyway. c6, okay. And now finally bishop d3. And black makes the bishop waste a bit of time with d takes c4 to try and free the position a bit now, offering an exchange of dark square bishops, which Alexander accepts. He accepts the exchange of dark square bishops. So, okay, in this position, maybe you would say there's nothing really to write home about for white, but I think he's got a small edge. Now, this is an interesting Alexander Alekhine maneuver we've seen before, but where someone disastrously played after knight e4, well, in a similar sort of position, f5, where Alexander just retreated back and then exploited the dark squares. But in this game, that's not the case. There's another point behind the move knight e4, which is just to put the knight in an attacking position on g3. So knight 5 to f6, offering exchange of knights. It's refused. Knight g3. So is the knight bad here? The knights look quite pretty by each other here on f3 and g3. But is black equalising? Emanuel plays this e5 break, which looks to be kind of thematic. Possible downside here, though, this diagonal, pin on f7, the f5 square, which can be pounced on with this knight. Are these significant dynamic factors to compensate for black seemingly liberating his pieces? Well, white just castles now, and now the move e takes d4 is played. And Alexander doesn't want necessarily, and he's not necessarily forced to play e takes d4. This pawn potentially is vulnerable later as an isolated queen's pawn. You know, maybe like knight b6. Black could set up a blockade square on d5. So actually a different method was chosen. Well, actually the pawn wasn't immediately recaptured. In fact, the black queen was attacked. So knight f5. And after queen d8, the f5 knight's kind of juicy. It's kind of Kasparov's favourite knight position actually on the king side, the f5 square. It's quite juicy here because it's attacking quite important squares, especially on the king side, g7. And if the g7 pawn can be sort of weakened further, you know, provoked for g6, then black will end up with potentially critical dark square weaknesses around his king. Okay, so the knight wants to be left on f5, but what to do about the d pawn? Okay, well, knight 3 takes d4 was chosen. So you can see that there's a problem bishop here. It looks as though black hasn't properly equalised, unfortunately. And not only that, with this structure, it seems white's in a greater position to use the semi-open d file pressure than black the semi-open e file pressure. But, okay, so knight e5, at least this bishop's got scope. But the knights are protecting each other quite neatly here. So f5 is not a big deal at the moment. This bishop on c4 can just retreat now. And here it's interesting, actually. Emanuel's a bit worried about that bishop on f5. He must be. He took it off here. So bishop takes f5. But white's got a horrible nagging edge now. And an invasory move coming up. He doesn't want to exchange off queens here. The d file looks fairly unpleasant. He plays queen b6, but this invasory move by Alexander, using the centre as a pivot, actually, to get to black's king. And we see this echoed in a lot of games, that sometimes, you know, the d6 square is a kind of pivot square for the king side as well. If a queen can sometimes do this kind of action, or I from g3. You get that a lot in Sicilian variations. The queen on g3, I not just the central square d6, but also the king side usually. So here queen d6 is a useful pivot square to get to the black king actually. So the immediate question is what to do about this pawn knight as well. And if rook e8, then there's the rude you know, knight e7 check, winning a piece. You know, queen takes c7, unless black wants to give up the exchange. So the knight moves back rather humbly, and it looks fragile. Black's position looks fragile because we've got this nasty unchallenged light square bishop pinning that pawn, nasty pressure on the d file. Black is not able to use his semi-open e file. So in terms of the trump cards being exploited, white is much further down the line for exploiting his particular trump cards in the position, already. That d-file is not just being used to put black in a passive position with the knights, but also as a pivot for the queen. So rook fd1 reinforces the d-file pressure. After rook ad8, now we see this queen g3 move. The queen's nicely parked, threatening immediate mate in 1. What does black do about it? It's difficult, very difficult position now. Let's say knight h5 looks terrible to play, but I wonder what the concrete refutation is. Actually, let's just engine check this. Knight h5. If he wanted to try and avoid like a weakening move, here queen g5. Then we've got some nasty threats, and apparently, like is recommended here anyway. Because if say something like knight f6, then we've got g4, and it starts to be very unpleasant. Okay, let's turn that off. So unfortunately, g6 is a further compromise to Emanuel's position here. So he's got these weakened dark squares now, without a fianchetto bishop to cover them. So the king is slightly more naked, and is also coming out now after queen g5. Not coming out, sorry, or trying to do something about the position, the king's safety, with king h8. So at least, I suppose, king h8 is at least means, is this knight going to go away now? But the knight's unfortunately got a really good square d6 to go to here, and it uses that to attack f7 now. So the king is now forced back, unfortunately, into the firing lines and into the pins with king g7. So Alexander's got a magnificent basis for a nice attack here, this position already. So the combinations don't appear out of nowhere in Alexander's games. Sometimes he has to have a very good position for these magic combinations to flow naturally. So in that way, he's a universal style player. His middle game, I think, is equivalent to modern GMs, and certainly Lasker. Okay, not in this game. Lasker played passively. The opening seemed to give him major issues which he didn't recover from, basically. But in previous encounters, Lasker's playing Houdini strength, up to 60-70% Houdini agreement. Lasker's a formidable player. But in this game, yeah, he's on the wrong foot here. He started on the wrong foot. After e4, this e4 now means, if you look at e4, that the third rank is cleared for potential, rook moves, which are pretty lethal actually, because you imagine a rook and a queen coordinating for queen h6, and then if queen h6, then we've got f7 vulnerable. We've got on the diagonal, and other issues to deal with as well. It's starting to look pretty nasty, and this retreat doesn't inspire confidence now. Knight g8 does not inspire confidence. Black's holding on by a thread, and that thread's about to be disconnected, cut with a scissors quite severely now. The next move is a rook lift, and other rook lifts might be equally dangerous. I think on engine checking this game earlier, I think any rook lift here, rook c3, is also very dangerous, because basically that third rank is also now a pivot for the queen and rook to coordinate, and also knight f5 is still on the cards. It's all really dangerous. But rook d3. Okay, and now this irritating queen is attempted to be evicted. Okay, with this next move, but black's position is really difficult here anyway. I suppose this game is an advert for playing the Slav actually, because white really just got major trump cards out of the opening. I think based on black's, I know there was an inaccuracy. There must have been an inaccuracy played here. I think the e5 earlier, but anyway, let's continue. f6. Okay, so did the queen go back? Does it need to go back? No, it doesn't need to go back. After knight f5 check, the king is forced only square, king h8. Now I'll give you 20 seconds here, guys. So 20 seconds starting from now. I wonder if you can predict the next move for white. You may want to pause the video here. So 20 seconds starting from now. Okay, when you have a great position, combination should flow. This is a great position. White's rook on the third rank is particularly dangerous, not just for d-file doubling up, but also for kingside operations. So I'm hoping you found this move. If you haven't, just think of this principle. Appreciate the significance of the seemingly insignificant. Because I think Alexander Alekhine really demonstrated he had a full grip on the concept of this penetrating glance. He could see subtle resources in the position, which made him especially tactically dangerous. And his combinatory vision, was brilliant. And here, it's a simple, neat combination move. So what's seemingly insignificant and outrageous? I hope you spotted it. Queen takes g6. Wow. And here, Lasker was forced to resign because it's pretty nasty. Well, if you don't take the queen, you're going to get mated on g7. There's how to defend g7 here. The rook's not very helpful. You just can take it. There's nothing which can come in contact to defend g7. And if you do take it, then this rook h3 check is lethal, because this knight on f5, Kasparov's favourite knight, is doing a fine job of guarding g7. And the bishop on the diagonal means that even if the desperate move knight h6 is played, rook takes h6 is still mate, because that square is cut off and that square is cut off. These guys are doing a great job. So it was a wrong-footed opening, really, to be fair. Lasker was still a very, very powerful player, and probably won, deliberately. I don't think Alexander would have been too keen to have risked his world title playing Lasker. But let's look at the game again. In earlier years, preferring. I think he was comfortable playing Berlima and Juve, at least optimistic. I think more. You could argue he would have been more optimistic than to have been playing Lasker for a World Championship challenge. So 1934 Zurich. So this game where black did not really properly equalise after knight d5, it seems, because this was a good move, knight e4, it seems, in retrospect. Although I'm curious looking at this, what would be wrong with queen b4 check? I can't resist just engine checking this position. f5 is actually was shown for a moment there. So queen d2, and white would still be better just with the queens off. There's this bishop problem, I think. Okay, so black didn't want to do that. So after knight g3, it seems some problems here with e5. I mean, maybe as a thematic break, e5 is the wrong one to choose, here. Maybe c5 is better in a way, because you're trying to use this compensate for a particularly bad bishop, but not really. You don't really want to emphasize this bishop either. So c5 and this plan of a6, b5, bishop b7, as Jacobian mentioned, might be better, because you want to leave this pawn maybe defensively on e6. That pawn not only means this f7 pawn won't be pinned, it means a knight to f5 won't be possible. It's guarding f5 as well. So to move for choosing this break, e6 to e5 instead of c6 to c5, it seems a bit risky, as demonstrated by this game in retrospect. So white castled. So white's got basically two immediate, tactical trump cards. This bishop on the diagonal, and this ability to use the f5 square. Just because of that break was chosen e5. That pawn break. So knight f5, and the trump cards are kind of used here. So the bishop sitting nicely on the diagonal, and without a challenger now after bishop takes f5. So white's advantages are accumulating. So queen b6, and now the basis for the attack. Basically, this invasory queen d6 makes sure black's not getting away with anything. All of white's pieces are coming together as a team here. In fact, after rook ft1. There's beautiful coordination. There's no bad piece in the white position. The queen's use of d6 as a pivot to get to the black king side to induce further kingside weaknesses is very, very nice here. This queen d6 to g3 maneuver. And the pressure is just nagging now, really irritating after queen g5. It supports more things queen g5. You know, in some variations, you know, queen h6 is going to be dangerous just to try and mate. In others, rook d6 is going to be dangerous. For example, if you put in a token move here, a6, rook d6 is really dangerous. Like knight e8, you've got rook takes g6, just shows the devastation black could be subjected to this kind of variation with knight e7 mating. So this use of the d file is really as a basis for the attack, not just the queen rerouting, but also a rook coming to d6. Shows the power of white's position here against the black king. Okay, so king h8 and knight d6, drawing the king out, because how else is f7 being defended here? So the king's having to defend itself, f7, but after e4 we have more sort of pivot possibilities, using the third rank as a pivot to amplify the attack. So knight g8, rook d3, and it's all starting to look really bad, really bad, with this rook being able to luxuriously come to h3 if needed. So f6, and the game's finished off quite quickly now after check, and this crushing blow, appreciating the significance of the insignificances, which is helped when you've got a winning position anyway, of course. You know, a huge bishop on the diagonal and a huge knight on f5, and a rook with great versatility. So queen takes g6 maybe isn't so magical as it first might seem. So causing resignation, but okay. Comments or questions on YouTube. Hope you enjoyed that. Thanks very much.